Hi, I'm Rabbi Dan Salzberg from Beth Jacob Synagogue in Hamilton, Ontario, and I'm going to offer my Kol Nidre sermon for 2011, 57 to 72. It's a nice day. It's Erev Kol Nidre, so I can do this outside. So if there's noises that sound like I'm not in a synagogue and outside, uh, that's the reason for it. The sounds different on video than it does in person because in person there's a formality to it that's lacking here, but hopefully you'll get the idea. This is called Out of Many, One. This past winter, I spent some time in Berlin, part of a trip with about a dozen colleagues. I've spoken about it with many of you, about different aspects of the experience. There's a lot of ways I could approach this Day of Atonement with the story of what happens when a group of rabbis visits Berlin. But this is the story that I can't get out of my head. We were there to visit the rapidly growing Jewish community. I had the honor of giving a Shabbat drash at the Masorti Conservative Shul in eastern Berlin, and to, of course, study the history and learn about how Germans deal with their history. We visited Sachsenhausen, the concentration camp just outside the city, on a cold February day. It was appropriately miserable, freezing with the wind cutting through our winter clothing. Especially effective, though, was our guide. He looked like a Saturday Night Live caricature of what's derisively called Eurotrash. A thin man, hip, with a strangely styled black shirt with zippers randomly placed around it. But we know to look past appearances, and he was good at his job. Information he gave was not just chilling in its details, but it was chilling in its delivery. Because he told of the horrors of the camp with great empathy. He told us from the perspective of the camp inmates, but occasionally he used terminology of the perpetrators, more fully giving us a feel for their sardonic cruelty of the inhuman machinations of the camp's former masters. I expect a guide at any historical site to be knowledgeable about the place, but this man conveyed a feeling for not just the history, but also the moral and spiritual import of this windswept place. And so we spoke of the victims of the German regime of 1933 to 45, the victims of the Soviets who took over the camp and used it to their own ends after the war, and of the assault on memory of an arson attack on the Jewish barracks in 1992, the work of a neo-Nazi responding to a visit to the camp by Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, Zichrono Livracha. As we prepared to leave, a colleague of mine said that he too felt our guide availed himself well of the notably difficult task of a German guide showing a dozen rabbis a concentration camp. So we asked him, how do you manage to show the requisite honesty with such emotional skill? Our guide paused, looked at the ground, then up at us. My grandfather was a guard here, he said. I cannot change that. So I do this. It's one of the less expected lessons we can take from Sachsenhausen, but significant nonetheless. It speaks to a certain historical reality and a certain human reality. We are not the creators of the world we inhabit. We did little to develop the language, develop the society as individuals. We do not construct the infrastructure that defines our lives. The social mores and technologies that define our lives are not of our making, just as the wars, conflicts, diseases, and injustices are not our fault either. We are responsible for how we respond to the realities that are not our fault, however. We are responsible not for who our grandparents were, but to improve the world they left for us. When we think of our ancestors, we're not thinking of history's most horrible criminals, lahavdil. We are saddled with many burdens, but Baruch Hashem, that is not one of them. Often, we hear of ordinary people who, in extraordinary times, did extraordinary things. That's a message behind so many stories of heroism from the Shoah, both of brave Jews and righteous Gentiles who risked their lives for what was right during a time of moral chaos. I'm inspired by such stories, but my world is different from theirs. So I tell this story, because here was a man who, in ordinary times, in our time, chose to make an extraordinary decision, to accept not the guilt that belongs to others, but the responsibility that is our own, the responsibility that the world places on us. That is a clear purpose of this day of Yom Kippur. We said it just once silently to ourselves, and we'll say it again out loud yet tonight, a total of 10 times over the course of Yom Kippur. שאין אנחנו עזב עניים וקשאי עורף, לומר לפניך אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו, צדיקים אנחנו ולא חטאנו, אבל אנחנו ואבותינו חטאנו. We are not so insolent or stubborn to say before you, Adonai, our God and God of our ancestors, that we are tzaddikim who never sin, for we, like our ancestors, have sinned. Part of the liberating power of Yom Kippur is confessing that we are not perfect, that no person is, and that to admit what we've done wrong and where we look to improve. It's a statement of ownership over our lives, a statement that we take responsibility for our actions, for our lack of actions, for our misdeeds as well as our good deeds. We are asked to take responsibility for our lives, regardless of the fact that we are imperfect beings born into an imperfect world. That just means it's up to us to admit it and commit to doing better, to have confidence that we are worthy of forgiveness and to forgive others who sincerely seek to mend their ways. This is the core message of Jewish life. Life is God's call to responsibility, says Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, the Orthodox Chief Rabbi of Great Britain. We are obliged to improve ourselves and to improve the world, and we are to do so because our actions matter. Our actions matter to ourselves, to those around us, to the world, and to God. Our choices matter. It is easy to forget this when we think of the massive, seemingly insoluble problems in the world. Our own decisions seem like less than a drop in the ocean. Despair, however, is not a Jewish emotion. We continue to assert, as we have for thousands of years, that every action, like every life, is significant. Time and again the world tries to convince us otherwise, and time and again we reassert our belief that we can make the world better than it would be without us. Life is God's call to responsibility. We are to pick up and do what we can. As the sages said 2,000 years ago, Lo alecha mlacha ligmor v'lo ata ben chorin livatel mimena. You are not obligated to complete the task, neither are you free to desist from it. It's not only responsibility on a global scale we accept on this day, but also, especially, on a personal level. We look deeply into our actions and, dropping the mask that we wear the rest of the year, come face to face with ourselves as we really are. That's why we confess that we've made mistakes. We do it a few times just to make sure we've caught everything. We confess silently because there are some truths that is all we can do just to admit it to ourselves in the privacy of our thoughts. And we confess out loud because it's easier to admit our faults when we realize that others are doing the same. It's our choice. Reshut l'kol adam netuyah. Free will is granted to all, Maimonides says. If one desires to turn to the path of good and be righteous, hareshut biado. The choice is given. Should one decide to turn to the path of evil and be wicked, Maimonides says, hareshut biado. The choice is given. But I know that doesn't resonate with everyone. If you are unable to believe in God, then believe in your power to change the world. If you are unable to believe in your power to change the world, then believe in your power to change yourself. If you are unable to believe that you have the power to change yourself, then know that I believe you have that power, that we all have the power to change our lives for the better, to live up to the responsibilities that our generation bears. We can live our lives in such a way that we show the world that people can change for the better, that we can represent the kindness, the justice, and the godliness the prophets call for us to act on this day. The crucial aspect of belief in God is not a belief in a divine Superman swooping in to save you, or an old man in the clouds making sure that nice things happen, but in believing that we are capable of changing ourselves and our world for the better. The crucial aspect is believing that we are more than a random collection of atoms fated to do whatever we're programmed to do. Among the many blessings of our age are the freedoms that our society blesses us with. We live with more freedom and less fear of persecution than any generation of Jews in millennia. But we must be aware of where Jewish thought breaks from many dominant views. Though ours is an age of freedom, the irony is that many fields of study and popular thought reduces our feeling that we are free, and says that we are in fact responsible for our actions. As Rabbi Sachs points out, quote, the entire thrust of modern thought, from Marx to Freud, from neuroscience to evolutionary psychology, has been to undermine the idea that we act because we choose, choose because we form intentions because we are free, and because we are free, we have responsibility. We are what we are because of economic forces, irrational drives, genetic determinism, or the blind struggle of our genes to replicate themselves into the next generation with or without our knowledge and consent. A conception of human life without responsibility fails to do justice to human dignity and is no way to ensure our survival as a species." End quote. Undoubtedly, existence is complex, and what we can do what we choose to do or become, or what choices are closed to us, changes due to factors outside our control, all of those are present. But the essential message of Judaism is that there are always factors that are under our control. We may not always be able to choose whatever we want to be. I will never be a professional basketball player or a rock star or a neuroscientist, but God constantly meets me in the moment I'm in and urges me to make the best possible choice. The choice opens a door for more choices and closes others, and again, I am free to choose in that moment as well. My teacher, Rabbi Brad Artson, understands this as process theology, and it resonates with the themes of today. We have free will, and because we have free will, we are responsible for our actions. We are not responsible for what is out of our control, but we are absolutely responsible for how we react to the world we're born into. We are to rise to live inspired lives, joyful lives, and responsible lives. We are called to do it because we are created b'tselem Elohim in the image of God. Not that God looks physically like me or you, or any other 6.75 billion people on this earth, but the degree to which humans are free to choose, our moral sense, our ability to make memory significant, that's unique. And that is what makes us little less than divine. But it is not just God that places a responsibility on you, and it is not just the Jewish tradition that asks this of us. It is the man who said, "My grandfather was a guard here. I cannot change that, so I do this." If he is capable of creating a life that responds to the responsibilities that are his lot, but not his fault, then you and I are capable of no less. This is not a dorm room question, what would you do if faced with the Nazis? This is the real question. What do you do, given the world we've inherited? I was not born to a family starving in Africa or crushed by poverty in Haiti or suffering under dictatorships in the Middle East or in a neighborhood where bullets are part of the daily forecast. I know some of you were, but for most of you, you probably weren't either. So, what are we going to choose to do with our gift? How are we going to live? What will you do when you walk out the door tonight? Who will you be? A person who rises to the moment, who acts as if the world is worth saving, that each of us has the power to help do it? Will we be people who, at the end of what I hope will be long lives, are able to look back with pride at how we rose to the challenges of our time? Or will we be, sadly, less than that? The choice is yours. The responsibility is ours. And so, I did take a lesson from this man who is saddled with the horrible truth that his family was built on the ashes of the innocent. Take ownership of your position in history. Take responsibility, not just for your own happiness, but for the well-being of the world around you. You have one life. Live a life that you can look at and be proud of what you did to make some small part of the world better because you were here. Don't wallow in blame of others, though it is worthwhile knowing what is your fault and what is not your fault. Because in Yom Kippur, we're committed to pick up our lives and make them worthy of saving, worthy of those who came before us, worthy of those who will follow us, worthy of the divine spirit that is within you. You cannot change the past, but know what you can do. You can change the future. Life is God's call to responsibility. Gemar Chatima Tova, may it be inscribed and sealed for a year of good and of blessing. Shabbat Shalom.